There's no time of the year quite like summer. The intense heat, the insects, the short, restless nights. It's lovely because you maybe don't have to work. You can do anything you want within reasonable limits. It bears reminding that summer break can be a pretty magical time of year if one uses their imagination and has the right inspiration. And that's where Disney has every right to capitalize on that magic feeling. But the people they got to create the ultimate summer fantasy came from the least expected places. Somehow, one of the greatest cartoons ever made was created in the form of Phineas and Ferb. Imaginative, hilarious, and enduring above all else, this is the sort of S-tier animated show that only comes around once every couple years. I don't want to push the impression that the era it came from was dire and it was some sort of diamond in the rough, because that isn't the case at all. The second half of the 2000s was a more creative and impactful period for TV animation than most historians give it credit, with Phineas and Ferb being a shining example of what can go right, what cartoons emphasized going into the 2010s, and how to stay a timeless, resilient TV show that can appeal to all generations. It might surprise you to know, given how new the show still feels, that its origins can be traced all the way back to around 1991. Animators Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh were working on The Simpsons at this time, and would later go on to provide stories for several 90s Nicktoons. Dan drew a boy with a triangular face on a napkin sometime that year, and he and Swampy would gradually flesh out a story and community for him, filled with similarly diverse character designs. Loosely based on Dan's childhood making home movies, they chose the two weirdest alliterative names they could, one of them already occasionally used by them on Rocko's Modern Life.
This is Ferb McGiggins, your fly-in-the-eye traffic reporter.
And a legend was almost born. I say almost because they pitched the idea to Cartoon Network in 1996, as Rocko was wrapping up, but they weren't interested in their many ideas. You see, there was also this recurring subplot about the boy's pet platypus fighting crime, and another one about a bunch of bugs trying to be noticed by mankind, which seemed to overcomplicate the pitch. Fox also declined the show, but after a couple more years of refining the ideas and making sure the most exciting elements were at the forefront, they were finally picked up by Disney in the mid-2000s. Nickelodeon also turned it down at least once before then, add it to the list. One little hurdle they felt in selling the show to such a family-oriented company was Dan's work on Family Guy. I'm just saying, the vasectomy song isn't aiming for the Sweet Life of Zack and Cody audience. Thankfully, a Disney executive at the time was a fan of Family Guy and had trust that the duo could make great children's comedy. Never thought I'd say this, but bless the Disney executive and his freaking sweet sense of humor, as the kids say. They made a storyboard pilot in 2006 about Phineas and Ferb building a roller coaster across town, while their pet Perry the Platypus stopped the evil Dr. Mittelschmertz from using tinfoil for evil. While Phineas is a lot more snarky here than in the show, and Mittelschmertz would later be renamed Doofenshmirtz, you can tell they'd been thinking all the nooks and crannies through for years and years. A fully animated version of this pitch, Roller Coaster, was shown on Disney Channel on August 17, 2007, as a sneak peek after High School Musical 2, their all-time highest-rated broadcast. A lot of eyes were on the show, but it ultimately received mixed reviews at the time of airing. Some were thrown off by how frantic the pace was, but admitted it could get better. After another sneak peek in September, Phineas and Ferb officially premiered on February 1st, 2008 with Flop Stars, typical of Disney Channel to highlight the tween pop episode, but as the days and weeks went on through Phineas and Ferb-ruary, word of mouth quickly spread that Disney had a new hit series. The comedy and characters got the acclaim they rightfully deserved, and a second season was hastily commissioned. After 17 years of trial and error, Dan and Swampy's baby was out in the world, and it was set to prove that there's no such thing as an ordinary day.
Ooh, I'm gonna go tell Mom, and when she sees what you are doing, you are going down! Down, down, down! We're gonna need a blowtorch and some more peanut butter.
The city of Danville, a place in the tri-state area of the US that for some reason gives kids 104 days of summer break. The joke is they were expecting 52 two-segment episodes, but it gives to 8, 10, 9? Young stepbrothers, Phineas, Flynn and Ferb Fletcher, more than enough time to build as many contraptions and go on as many adventures as they want. their older sister Candace is frequently annoyed by their noise and the danger they put themselves in, and attempts to bring the mischief to their mother Linda's attention, but everything always goes back to normal before they can be busted. Meanwhile, their secret agent pet, Perry the Platypus, is called upon by his senior, Major Monogram, to thwart the evil Dr. Doofenshmirtz's latest scheme, usually a machine with an innator suffix that he plans on using to take over the tri-state area. They do fight and Doofenshmirtz is thwarted, with his innator sometimes having something to do with the end of Phineas and Ferb's adventure. This is what you can assume almost every episode will be about, and it's a very tight formula that still promises tons of variety and story selection. That's important in these invention of the week sorts of shows, and even more so when you can expect 2 inventions in 2 11-minute episodes, so 4 inventions per week. But it's not just inventions, sometimes the Flynn Fletcher family goes on trips and Doofenshmirtz's base is relocated to suit the setting. The daily projects can also take the boys out of the backyard and into the streets of Danville, where we can get a taste of the rest of the town's sense of humour. Relatively wholesome quips, which I can assure you was by design. In creating and developing the cast of Phineas and Ferb, Dan and Swampy had a strict no idiots and no jerks policy. Everyone in the show had to be clever and approachable in their own silly way. Basically, nothing I hate about Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends' character development is here. You could argue that this makes the show feel a bit sterile and safe spacey if you need a shot of more biting humour, but I'd say this was a very successful self-imposed challenge after Dan left Family Guy, and led to the creation of some of the most entertaining TV characters of the decade. Phineas is an outgoing and optimistic go-getter whose mission in life is to make every single day exciting and fun. Since this is always accomplished in some way or another, that sort of made him the Mickey Mouse of the roster after a while. You don't expect him to feel anguish, concern, or boredom. That happens, but it turns into a special occasion. I still say he's a good role model for the rest of the cast, and exemplifies what the show is about. His brother Ferb is a mostly mute man of action, oftentimes serving as a vehicle for visual comedy, but they make a point that he's equally capable of seizing the day, creating these summer schemes, and getting people in on the fun. It's a treat whenever he has something to say, and an event when a story focuses on him. He's the kind of character you always want to see more of, which is great for boosting the interest in your eponymous duo. The dirty little secret about Phineas and Ferb, however, is that they're the main characters in name only. They have their chances to be heroes and protagonists, but their role in the show is more what they represent than how they achieve their goals. The real vehicles for story arcs and character growth are everyone else in Danville. It's a big place, and while some of its residents are fully content with their lives, others are stuck chasing rainbows. Enter Candace Flynn, their older sister obsessed with busting them, her boyfriend Jeremy, busting them, and her boyfriend Jeremy. She has a one-track mind, to put it lightly, and it makes her pretty bossy and clingy, but it's just exaggerated enough to fit the show's sense of humour. Early on, they do as much as they can to show that she does care about her family and friends, but just has an overly idealized picture of how normal their lives should be. A lot of these bossy, acerbic sibling sort of characters can come off as stock and uninteresting, but Candace is able to break free from that mold and be a funny, likable, and three-dimensional character. Again, it feels like they took years to figure out the best ways to make her spiky, but not an unpleasant character to watch. Their pet Perry the Platypus, or Agent P, is a secret agent who spends his days fighting the evil Dr. Doofenshmirtz. This really is the sort of show where the mute platypus is my favorite character. They make him so expressive, but only ever rely on action and scenario with him. Like Ferb, when they dedicate an episode to his world, how he reacts to Doof's plans, or needing to keep his true identity a secret from the Flynn Fletchers, Christmas has come. Easily the best platypus in animation history. Sorry, Edward from Camp Laszlo, there's a new king. This guy Perry keeps fighting, Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz, is a 40-something wannabe villain spending his time creating innators to solve his first world problems. While he does mean to cause harm to the tri-state area, he's not pure evil. In fact, he's kind of nice the more you get to know him. His increasingly scarring and flat-out absurd backstories aren't the only way they get you to empathize with him. He's always beaten by a platypus, upstaged by his brother, Mayor Roger, isn't welcomed by his love muffin peers, and has a hard time getting along with his daughter Vanessa. The fact that he puts the effort into being a good father anyway, when his own parents were neglectful at best, is why he's received the title of Worst Disney Villain, Best Disney Parent. His teenage daughter, Vanessa Doofenshmirtz, is always going through a lot: boyfriends, peer issues, wanting to bust her father to his ex-wife Charlene, wanting to go on a different path from her father. You can still tell they're related. She has gothic tastes and doesn't mind being evil once in a while, and you're bound to relate to her on some level. She has some banger moments and a great singing voice, as does most of the cast, so she fits the bill. Major Monogram is Perry's boss and the founder of ALCA, the organization without a cool acronym. Stern and no nonsense? Not really. He's up for a little fun and games, but still takes his job and animal agents very seriously. That's what you want out of a character that typically gets a 30-second checkup with each episode. His intern Carl, aka Dr. Coconut, is a fun partner in crime, usually in charge of the dirty work of heading out into the world and going on additional missions. Unpaid, of course. He's the right sidekick for Major Monogram, younger and meeker, but by no means less entertaining. In a way, it's wonderful that this show has kids, teens, young adults, and middle-aged adults all at the same time, and knows how much time to allot to each demographic. Phineas and Ferb might be off in their own happy lands with all the stuff they build, but they have a strong circle of friends. And Isabella Garcia Shapiro is a girl over the road with a huge crush on Phineas, and is also the leader of the Fireside Girls, a Girl Scout troop with ambitions equal to Phineas and Ferb. No doubt she's as funny as she is useful, even if it's kinda soul-crushing when she gets friend-zoned for the 250th time. Baljit is an Indian kid who loves knowledge, but mostly within a school-like environment, so summer's a bit hard for him. He's able to add comic relief and support, and is able to bounce off everyone well, especially Buford, the big, tough bully who isn't so big and tough after his first few appearances. His odd couple dynamic with Baljit is really fun, always something you can look forward to as a mild focus rather than a major one. This quintet of kids is codified by the end of Season 1, and it's exceptionally well-rounded and interesting. Interesting in how the other three kids were quickly given the job of propping Phineas and Ferb up, and keeping the core gang more diverse and varied in personality. This was a good call. I couldn't see Phineas and Ferb carrying the show on their own for long. The Flintflesher parents are delightfully boring. The mother Linda takes cooking classes and runs an antique store, and is probably the most down-to-earth character on the show. This sort of works within the framework of the running gag that she's never made aware of her son's antics. It doesn't gel well with someone from the real world, but she still plays a fun straight man to Candace's hyperactive bust attempts. Their father Lawrence is also something of a paint-by-numbers fellow, enjoying the dull parts of life more than others, but at least takes part in more of the action. In an animation landscape where most parents were morons, I'm happy they never made Linda or Lawrence too extreme in any way. They help keep the family grounded. Jeremy Johnson is Candace's boyfriend who she spends 50% of her time thinking about, and he's admittedly one of the less interesting characters. Just the nice guy down the street who doesn't mind the antics Candace goes through. Like Linda, I like that about him, how he was meant to support Candace rather than upstage her. His little sister Susie was initially a pretty big breach in the no idiots or jerks code, existing to be a complication for Candace to overcome in impressing Jeremy, and to turn the cutesy little girl convention on its head. This didn't lead to the best results, so they hastily justified her behavior in Season 2. She's still the biggest jerk in the show, but I mean, it's kind of funny that the little girl is the most hardened person in Danville. Candace's best friend is Stacy, and I think I've already described her fully. She's there to provide a smarter, more collected reaction to her life and offer her advice. Still a quirky teen on her own, and not completely above feeding into her friend's behavior, but still a better friend than most would have been, better than Jenny at least, whose quick departure from the limelight is joked about as early as Season 1. She's like Django in that regard, a sixth ranger to the boys who only got 2 major appearances, then became background fodder as well. I guess we're heading into the everyone else category now. Norm is Doof's giant robot, originally designed after a bland depiction of man and built to destroy platter people. He develops a naive personality and an aching heart, hardly ever getting any love from his master. Norm's a tragic character wrapped in a thin layer of irony, just see-through enough for you to empathize with him as he gleefully describes his depressing thoughts. Monty Monogram was a good addition to the cast, but a late one, first popping up in Season 3. He's the son of Major Monogram, voiced by Seth Green, who quickly gets into a relationship with Vanessa, the classic case of Romeo and Juliet-itis. I'm still happy with the stories he got. They can poke fun at how contrived these setups are, and get another chemistry started with Vanessa that takes her on newer risks. Monty's a fine dude all the same, but almost came too late to have an impact. And finally, we have Irving, who took over Django's role as the 6th Ranger in Season 2, an obsessive fanboy of Phineas and Ferb's adventures who's a bit awkward to hang around. I liked him as a kid and I like him now, but I totally understand why some people wouldn't. His uses are limited and his shtick is traditionally divisive. I just like the idea of a fan joining in on the fun. I hardly feel like I've scratched the surface. There are tons and tons of characters all over town, and they each offer something in the show's favor, a laugh, a piece of the story, or a charming design. They're a little looser with their policies on the background characters, but the extras you're never asked to think about too hard. The main cast they do have is large and in charge, and it's delightful to know that they're incredibly reliable for engaging stories with a wonderful sense of humor.
So what's this?
This is psychedelia. It's where the guitar solo came from.
No, I mean, what's with all the colors?
I have no idea.
The theme song promised that Phineas and Ferb were gonna do it all, and from the very first season, they were hell-bent on getting these two into as many madcap situations as possible. They promised the moon, and they literally gave you the moon. While there are a couple inventions and events that were completely kept in the confines of their backyard, it was smart of them to always branch out and do new things. A singing contest at the mall, a camping trip, a visit to the museum that makes the past come a little too alive. Even when the task of the day is confined to the backyard, they make it a huge location like the backyard beach or Swinter Swonderland. The point was to make sure every episode was special in its own way, and to give the audience something new every day. And I mean every day, because 17 of the 46 episodes aired throughout the February of 2008. It's sort of wild how quickly they were airing, getting audiences very familiar with the formulas in this show so they could get a hurry on turning them on their heads. A thin undercurrent of self-awareness is there from the beginning, but as summer goes on, the more the characters start to comment on how repetitive their lives are and how the formulas are affecting them. It's pretty noticeable with Candace and Doofenshmirtz, who have great material throughout Season 1, but it's a bit more formulaic than the Phineas and Ferb plots. It's interesting to see how the focus shifted as the series went on. They went through the motions pretty quickly. You can still sense a little Family Guy DNA in this season. The first episode has a cutaway gag less than 30 seconds in, a style of joke that became far more rare as it went on, and a few little jokes are a little of their time. I mean, everyone was taking jabs at Pluto back then. The 2000s were a different place, but the jokes are still largely timeless. By the midway point of the season, they're already doing experimental plot lines and format benders. I think the mixture of 11 and 22-minute episodes is a little lopsided in the former's favor, because the 22-minute episodes are some of the very best the show had on offer. Dude, We're Getting the Band Back Together was a big turning point, pumping more heart and drama into the episodes while still keeping in touch with the stories and message of the show. It was also where the show started to get more in touch with its musical side. A good thing too, because the soundtrack is one of the best things about this show. They were originally going to be more sparse, but when Disney Channel executives heard the song they'd written for Flopstars, Gitchy Gitchy Goo, they were asked to put a song in every episode from then on out. This means the pilot, Roller Coaster, is technically the only episode to not feature an original song, unless you count the theme song or Perry the Platypus theme, which played over the credits of the premiere. Dan and Swampy have clarified that they never got tired of writing songs, which is surprising given they'd written hundreds by the time the show ended, but to be fair, a lot of them are parodies and send-ups of musical genres. Damn good ones, I should stress. Many early Season 1 songs are rather blatant parodies or elaborate jingles, but there are some certified masterpieces to be found. My Undead Mummy, Disco Miniature Golfing Queen, Let's Take a Rocket Ship to Space. There's no shortage of classics. The crown jewel, however, is undoubtedly Ain't Got Rhythm. It's not just a song, it's a story about ex-Love Handle drummer Swampy dealing with his loss of rhythm, then discovering with the help of Phineas and Ferb that he's gotten it back through his dull, repetitive library job. It didn't deserve to lose an Emmy to Jimmy Kimmel Live, I think we can all agree on that. As for the animation on this show, it's good. I can't really say it's the most mind-blowing animation ever, but above all else, it's colourful and charming. In season 1 particularly, you'll notice a few colouring and timing errors if you watch it in HD, eye colours not being right, lips not moving at the edge of the frame, stuff like that. It never goes away entirely, unfortunately, but I guess most of the thought was going into the designs. The characters each look distinct in their own ways, especially through the head shapes earlier on. They start to get a little more normal as the series progresses, but still tend to have distinctive angular dimensions. The movement is believable all round, as are the backgrounds. Again, not the peak of artistry, but if they need a joke to work or a song number to look different, the animation will certainly work in their favour. Another way you can tell you're watching season 1 is with the voices. Phineas in particular still sounds like a young boy for the first half.
I for one am starting to get bored, and boredom is something up with which I will not put.
Gee, we sure have a lot of blueprints, models, and schematics.
But by the 9th or 10th episode, he starts to sound like the 20 to 30 something who has way too much fun with his Twitter account we all know today.
For an animal that doesn't do much, you sure know how to make a mess of things.
It seems Disney knew they had a hit on their hands right away because season 2 ended up having 39 half-hour episodes. Was this in 2009 or 1959? If you know anything about Disney after watching my videos, it's that there was hardly any sort of standard for season lengths for several years. You'll randomly get a really short season followed by a really long one, and I can only guess they were always racing to get their shows ready for syndication, if the need ever arose. What ended up happening to most of these shows is that the budget increased and the quality thankfully picked up in their second or third season, and Phineas and Ferb is no exception. This is the best of the bunch. And Disney needed it to be, because this was when Disney XD launched, and they were sort of forced to become its killer app since Disney Channel was getting more saturated with tween sitcoms by the minute. As a matter of fact, between the end of The Replacements in March 2009 and the premiere of Kick Buttowski's Suburban Daredevil in February 2010, Phineas and Ferb was the only animated series being made for older kids. It's wild to think now that DTVA has so much going on again, but for almost a year, Phineas and Ferb were left on their own to reshape what audiences thought of when Disney TV animation came to mind. And thank God it was during the bulk of their best batch of episodes. I think what cements this as the peak of the series is its emphasis on character development, specifically for the secondary cast. You pretty much know everything you'd ever need to know about Phineas, Ferb, Candace, and Perry after season 1. So now it was time to expand on characters like Doofenshmirtz, Isabella, and Monogram. The biggest winner would have to be Vanessa, however. She utterly crushes every episode she stars in. They've hit upon something touching in her relationship with her father, and she's more willing to accept him for the big doof that he is. Olivia Olson may have gotten the role through nepotism, but she kept it with a believable energy and incredible singing voice. This was also the season that introduced Irving, a character I have a certain fondness for, and Meep, the most adorable being in the galaxy who's actually an action hero. The jokes make more of an effort to catch you off guard. There's still a blend of surreal and subversive humor, but the fact they're more character-focused makes them more surprising and land more satisfyingly. One of my favorites that cements the snappier writing is the scene in Summer Belongs to You where Isabella's head explodes. The lead-in's flawless, and the explosion and payoff are as shocking as they are hysterical. And when the season premiere is about Phineas and Ferb discovering the lake nose monster, you know the stakes are gonna be a lot higher. The story selection is even more varied than the first, still knocking some invention of the week cliches off the list, but the narratives have gotten more action-packed and explorative. Format-bending episodes weren't as common, but they were starting to get more half-hour slots and specials to compensate. And if they're going to do jokes about the status quo almost being disrupted, they're going to have closer calls. There's no need to keep making jokes about it, time to really test how far it can be stretched. And I guess it's a bit redundant to say this after calling it my favorite season, but season 2 by far has my favorite soundtrack. It's amazing how many hits and how few misses they have, but given they'd planned every episode out after Disney's song mandate this time, I guess they were just giving the public what they wanted. They leaned a little more into rock than pop this year, but still kept their horizons broad with techno, country, and hardcore spa music.
It's our day, B&F in the scene. Gonna slather you with butter, make her feel like a queen.
Give Me a Grade is pretty high up there for capping off a wonderful spotlight, and you can't go wrong with Let's Go Digital, Mix and Mingle Machine, Summer Belongs to You, or There's a Platypus Controlling Me. I could spend an hour listing every masterpiece, but to cut to the chase, my absolute favorite song of the series is Mexican Jewish Cultural Festival. It's an encapsulation of the heritage and culture of Mrs. Garcia Shapiro, Isabel's mother, by all accounts a tertiary character, yet it made her out to be one of the most interesting people alive. Maybe picture this as the peak of the show's musical prowess, because it also had There Is No Candy in Me. The backing track is Candace stammering, the beat is Ferb's beatboxing, and the lyrics are sung by a rapping Baljeet. And it's a complete joke, to be fair, but it's such a mesmerizing song that didn't need to be there, but it is, because it's funny and charming. That's season 2 in a nutshell, going above and beyond to brighten your day.
I knew I should have gotten a down payment on the elephant.
In some aspects, season 3 continues to keep the plates spinning, giving you more of what you'd want after season 2, with the added benefits of more polished animation, though a little static sometimes, and some different takes on the setting. I know there are people out there who hate the historical episodes, but it's not like they haven't done this sort of thing before to good effect, and it was interesting to see how these characters would function a little differently in different time periods. They're breaths of fresh air in a season that was otherwise more of the same. There are still top quality episodes and specials, but I don't believe it's as laugh out loud funny as last season. The jokes still land, but they're more casually woven into the stories and situations, which are still inherently goofy and weird. But in Phineas's case especially, they're getting pretty formulaic. It was bound to happen after so many episodes, but he's starting to feel like a part of the show they're putting the least effort into writing. It's noticeable in that he and Ferb don't head out into Danville as much as they used to. A majority of their inventions and contraptions are relegated to the backyard, making them feel more insular from the blossoming character arcs outside of it. It's just good to know that these arcs are still interesting for the duration of the 35 episode order they got, which is still massive. We get more of Candace and Jeremy going out than in a while, now that they're officially an item. Vanessa's now got Monty to hang out with, and even Baljeet and Buford's subtle bromance is getting more attention. And by subtle, they called one episode Bully Bromance Breakout. It's no Owl House, but I still have the same reaction to seeing these sorts of relationships in children's media. I'm not the first to relate, but I think it's neat. Oh, Perry and Doofenshmirtz's relationship is also something to look out for by now, but let's move on. Season 3 was produced at the same time as the first Phineas and Ferb movie, Across the Second Dimension, which should explain the aspects of the season that were put on autopilot and its jokes not being as strong, but also the improved animation quality. Second Dimension had a massive impact on how the show looked and felt going forward. It's the anniversary of Phineas and Ferb's adoption of Perry, as well as the start of Perry's Alka training, and the boys commemorate by creating a sport based on his reflex action. Meanwhile, Doof's building another dimension in nature, but he's interrupted by not just Perry, but Phineas and Ferb, who help to repair it, unaware of the Doctor's rude motives. He wants to steal a couch. What a madman. Parallel universe shenanigans ensue, with Phineas and Ferb discovering Perry's secret agent persona, and Phineas doesn't take it well. To be completely fair, he was given a rather cold reasoning for Perry's secrecy by anti-Doofenshmirtz, and the heart of the story's still in the right place. I wouldn't go too in depth with it because it's an amazing movie in its own right, though it's much better suited for an individual review of some sort. It gave us the best song of season 3, Everything's Better with Perry, and that's all the praise I want to shower it with for now. Onward to season 4.
I'm telling you, I'm dry, Perry the Platypus, dry, and this summer just keeps going on and on. It feels like it's been going on for like 4 years.
With their 4th season, Phineas and Ferb cemented itself as Disney's most popular TV show ever, depending on your metric. It became their longest-running animated series by time on the air, surpassing Kim Possible's 5-year run, and by episode count, blazed past the original DuckTales 100 episodes. The 11-month period at the end of the previous decade, where it was Disney's only cartoon, was really paying off in hindsight. Disney XD had formed a stronger identity for itself, and DTVA was starting to take more risks with shows like Wander Over Yonder, Mickey Mouse 2013, and most famously Gravity Falls. Phineas and Ferb's emphasis on wild ideas and hidden depths had done its part in changing the animation landscape, but it was almost time for it to go before everything got too comfortable. 4 is still a good season, but I'd probably rank it below 1 to be honest. With this season, they done everything they possibly could with the characters and setting. Once you've done your mandatory Industrial Revolution themed episode, where do you go from there? The MCU, of course. Mission Marvel was an hour-long crossover with the ever-popular Marvel Comics, with Spider-Man, Thor, and the Hulk all getting their powers drained by one of Doof's innators, and needing Phineas and Ferb's help to get them back. I'm not the biggest superhero guy, I like some of the Spider-Man movies, so that's my level of appeal. I'm sure it was fun for the writers to make this crossover and get Doof to hang out with the villains and all that, but it's more about the fan service than a deep, engaging story, which is what fans of these properties were expecting now. The only major criticism I have with it is this whole subplot with Phineas excluding Candace and Isabella from helping out, and they feel sad about it. It's probably saying something about how comics used to be extremely male-heavy with their output and fan bases, but in that case, it doesn't do much for the story and just feels added to sneak in some emotion. But other than that, it's okay. A bit indulgent, but when the Star Wars crossover was announced, that's when people were really worried Phineas and Ferb would just become a platform for Disney to advertise all the franchises they'd bought. And yeah, you can throw that argument its way, but I believe it to be a much better idea, essentially being an alternate take on A New Hope, where Phineas and Ferb were there the whole time, you just never saw them. It may sound like I'm describing those terrible Tom and Jerry crossover movies, but this is a really clever take on the source material in its own right. Parodying Star Wars is not a novel concept, Robot Chicken and Family Guy have already done it, but if you were somehow able to create a master cut of Blue Harvest and Phineas and Ferb Star Wars intercut, I'd watch that. I like the original Star Wars, but as we all know, kids turn 12 and then choose one of these science fiction franchises to base their entire personality around, and I chose the one with the big fedora. But it wasn't just these crossovers that made Season 4 feel more special-oriented. Like, they were bent on doing as much as humanly possible while they were still around. They almost threw the world into an ice age, gave Perry a backdoor pilot to an unsuccessful spin-off, flooded the town with Doofenshmirtz zombie clones, straight up made a Treehouse of Horror, and did a flash-forward episode where Phineas and Isabella finally hook up. The directive for the big event episodes was seemingly to return to the show's original mission statement and make sure each of these was as fresh and wild as possible. But as a consequence, most of the standard episodes felt like those ordinary days the show strove to avoid. I think it was a good call to end Phineas and Ferb at 4 seasons. That sounds like a pretty short run, but these 130 half hours were spread out across 8 years, with the finale premiering on both Disney Channel and Disney XD on June 12, 2015, with the aforementioned backdoor pilot, Alka Files, being pushed back to November 9th. Few cartoons have run for 8 years, and fewer have stayed great in that time, so this was a good place to take a rest. Dan and Swampy have since been very keen on reviving it, but if its crossover with Milo Murphy's Law and Candace Against the Universe are anything to go by, it seems like some of the magic has faded. Not all of it. I really enjoyed Candace Against the Universe when it released and still do, but everything has its time, and Phineas and Ferb's was the late 2000s and early 2010s. It was a wonderful show in that time, and if it's ever revived and manages to reach or surpass the bar set by seasons 2 and 3, pinch me, because I must be dreaming. You longtime viewers should know the drill by now. Here are my favorite episodes. And if a top 21 sounds intimidating, good, because I've got a lot to say about each of them. Primal Perry faces the platypus off against a skilled hunter, and the thrill of the chase is intoxicating, but still funny in a sick sort of way. Liam is probably the biggest foe Perry ever faced, but the writing is pretty cheeky over how specific his hunting niche is. The B-plot with the Baljeet clones is also great. They clearly didn't want it to be a pacebreaker, so made sure it was just as interesting whenever cut back to. Delivery of Destiny asks a very important question and gives a very satisfying answer. How does the average Danville delivery boy cope with all the packages they're assigned to deliver? Paul is the everyman, seeing the worlds of all these facets of the show through the eyes of a normal dude. It's sort of the show congratulating itself for managing to make such weird concepts work so well for so long, but they deserved this pat on the back. Act Your Age was a weird and divisive episode when it first aired, because it's pretty much an official fanfiction, a flash forward that looks into how Phineas and Isabella drifted apart as they got older, and ends with them confessing their love for each other. It was really cheesy, I'll admit that, but I can't think of a better way for Isabella's crush on Phineas to be resolved. Plus, Doof's midlife crisis adventures make for a hilarious B-plot. The creators and older writers were really showing their age through it. Candace's big day sees her struggle with the hardship of arranging a wedding. Given how high-strung she's always been, it was a stellar concoction that led to a very stressful line of failures, but it's all worth it in the end to see Tiana and Bob have a happy wedding. It's way better than okay, but you can describe the Doof B-plot that way. A little divisive, but it's a testament to how Dan could even make something like this funnier just through delivering it. Mum's Birthday is the first time the show got all sweet and schmaltzy, but they could do it really well from damn near the beginning. It technically breaks the rule that Linda can't be aware of Phineas and Ferb's extraordinary construction talents, but it was all worth it for a look at how Candace can feel inadequate compared to them. The message is very important. On a birthday like this, it's the love and thought that counts more than being wowed. Don't Even Blink puts a new spin on Candace's busting attempts, with her wanting to make absolutely sure that it's there when Linda gets home this time. I don't know how, but they made a song about waiting patiently for nothing a catchy listen, and how the ride disappears is so meta this time it hurts. Words don't do it justice, it needs to be watched. My Fair Goalie is great at showing chemistries in action. Lawrence's brotherly love with Adrian, Ferb's cousins fearing he's becoming too American, and their older sister teaching Candace how to be more proper to appeal to Jeremy. They didn't just pull a reference out of a hat for the title, it's integrated into a story about anti-gravity footy pretty well. The Perry and Doof scuffle this week wasn't quite as interesting, being a sick day episode for Doof, but I got a few laughs out of the If a Tree Fell in the Forest-inator. Out to Launch was the biggest idea they had for season 1, and it's amazing to me that the show continued to push on after this. But the character's first journey into outer space still deserves some attention. It still feels tied down to earth, especially with Candace's struggle to ask Jeremy out to a dance being mirrored elsewhere in the universe. It's also got one of Doof's silliest backstories. Huge Hands Hans seems like a total bigot. The Necessary Roughness is The Mall episode, that I hope more cartoons can take a swing at. The place is massive, but there's only one container of pizzazium that everyone wants. Candace, Baljeet, and Vanessa all fight for it in all sorts of huge departments. It must have taken them forever to design all these new backgrounds for a mall they hardly ever visited again, but it was worth it for the thrill of the chase. And I'll vouch for Foster's and Phineas and Ferb on this, massage chairs are a special breed of temptress. Rollercoaster the Musical is another one that flexes how far they've come, by turning the pilot episode into a musical. I don't know how everyone was on Phineas and Ferb's wavelength, including Candace and the construction worker, but music had become so integral to the stories at this point that I don't really mind. As long as the songs are hits, and these ones certainly are. It's not at the top of my list obviously, but you could argue this was when they were at their zenith, pumping out classics without hesitation. Toy to the World is easily the most cynical of the early formulaic Season 1 offerings, criticizing the toy industry at every turn. Hardy Ha's productions are getting cheaper and more derivative, their factory workers are falling asleep on the job, and their executives are total yes-men to every last decision. But it's all hidden behind so much fun, with all the jokes they make with the Perry toys and the colourful refurbishment Phineas and Ferb give the factory. We Call It Maze is one of those that has both of the show's most engaging elements, wacky ideas and great character interactions, in spades. The maze is never dull, always offering up something new, but it's also got an extra challenge for Isabella, coming to realize that not every younger Fireside girl is going to look up to her. It's also got another fun space romp for the Doof plot, where he tries to ape the Great Tower of Pisa's tilt for his own building. Just the right kind of unbelievably petty but creative plan for him. Voyage to the Bottom of Buford introduced me to Sweating Through My Eyes, and made Buford a far more complex character. I find it kind of cruel that they put so much weight into his friendship with a pet goldfish, since those don't last very long anyway, but the journey to get it back is fun, as is Doof's failed attempt to convince the world he's evil after accidentally saving a kitten. There's an anti-animal cruelty theme through this episode I can get behind, unless you're a giant squid, but squids aren't animals, I think. Night of the Living Pharmacists is an hour-long special, and what were they gonna do today? A zombie apocalypse. Doof turns his brother into a mindless clone of himself, who turns others into himself. Basically, there's a lot of himselves. It's never really terrifying, since this Doof is and always has been pathetic as a villain, but it's incredibly gripping. Everyone's affected by the end in some way. It's an epidemic that outright disrupts the structure of the show, and slowly turns Danville into Dan Povenmireville, if you get what I'm saying. Monster from the Id is our regularly scheduled Dream World episode, where the gang travel into Candace's subconscious to find out where a misplaced trinket for Jeremy might be. But it's very colourful and very messed up, as should have been expected. Everything we've come to know about her is turned into either a funny background detail or a big menace, and it's an adventurous exploration that was well earned by now. With split personality, they ticked clones off their bucket list for the third time, of 4. Candace is split in 2, each personified by her most extreme desires, Jeremy and Busting. With a character that was in danger of flanderization all the time, this was a great chance to stretch her interest as far as they possibly could. And Ashley Tisdale's always getting a workout, but this must have been an especially tough one to record. Meepless in Seattle was a very reluctant sequel to the stellar Chronicles of Meep. Reluctant in that the narrator states it was never intended to be made, but they kept surprising you and applied new context to everything in the originally fake trailer. It's like they felt that if a sequel were to ever be made, it should have been much more grand and fulfilling. And that's the mindset that really helped make it just as brilliant as the original classic. Dude, We're Getting the Band Back Together introduces Love Handle, the 80s rock band that Linda and Lawrence had their first kiss at a concert for. It's their anniversary now, and Phineas and Ferb plan to bring them back together for the occasion. 80s nostalgia, like the decade itself, has gotten horribly oversaturated, so it was a wise decision to not focus too hard on the past and make some timeless tunes for the present and future. Every member of Love Handle's fleshed out and likable, the Doof and Vanessa subplot ties into the main story seamlessly, and it's just a feel-good episode. Last Day of Summer is the finale the show was always clamoring for. Time has run out for Candace and Doof to fulfill their goals, but with a little help from the do-overinator, the last day of summer is caught in an endless retracting loop that tears apart the fabric of space and time. The conflict has never been grander, the characters never in any more danger, and it's all about the universe screaming for the status quo to be maintained through to the very end. A masterpiece, and the greatest series finale to any animated show by a long shot. Summer Belongs to You was their first hour-long special, and like Phineas and Ferb, they set out to do as much as possible. It's a trip around the world to maximize the length of the summer solstice, taking fun pit stops at Tokyo and the Himalayas. But the City of Love and the deserted island were their longest and most gripping. They'd done trip episodes before, since they've gone to London sometimes, but without even going to an airport, they were able to condense the excitement of a world tour into an hour of hilarity and heart. They also felt confident enough to throw Phineas some great moments. His optimism and love for his sister is truly tested. My all-time favorite episode is The Chronicles of Meep, an episode with a lesson to never judge a book by its cover, but they went about it in the most bonkers way possible. A cute little alien crash lands in the backyard, who turns out to be not just more powerful than it seems, but an intergalactic agent who must stop the dreaded poacher Mitch at all costs. Every character and every place is a fine gem, oozing with wit and imagination. It's not straight science fiction or even a parody of it, it's a parody of the themes the genre usually covers, and weaves them into an exciting, dramatic romp through the most elaborate spoof ever. There's so many more top tier episodes I could have given my thoughts on. Put That Putter Away, Unfair Science Fair, Elementary My Dear Stacy, That Sinking Feeling, Nerds of a Feather, Misperceived Monotreme, The Remains of a Platypus, Where's Perry, Drusselcina Ween, but I think this has already been a very comprehensive look at what Phineas and Ferb is like at its best. Thankfully, there aren't many bad episodes, but I've managed to pick at least one from each season that ended up being weak links. Doof 101 attempted various things that ultimately didn't work out as well as they hoped. This one's set in autumn and deals with Doof becoming Vanessa's science teacher. Wacky shenanigans ensue, but not from this, but from her ex-boyfriend acting out and turning into a monster. This is also the episode where they try to reintroduce the bugs from the early pitches, but it doesn't work and just makes me happy they were trimmed out of the show when they were, before it even aired. Boyfriend from 27,000 BC is just generic and easy to poke holes in. The caveman Phineas and Ferb thaw out of ice doesn't offer much outside of the most oafish jokes, and I don't know about Candace being unable to tell it isn't Jeremy. Love makes us do stupid things, but come on. Doof's plan to destroy all the sandwich men in the world is also very random and petty, even for him. The later caveman episode also dates to before comedy, but at least it had more to offer. The mum attractor is really weird, honestly too weird for me. Both the boys and Doof create inventions designed to attract mothers, because they all have the exact same intuitions. I guess you could have made this sweet, but the whole mother control angle was creepier to me than they were probably shooting for. I guess that says more about my lack of motherly instinct. She's the mayor felt so off. Candace gets to be the mayor for a day, and unlike how these prizes usually go, she's fully in charge and takes control of the entire city, while Roger goes off to play golf. I also don't get why busting her brothers wasn't the first item on her agenda, or what they were thinking with the blatant reset button. They reportedly could never have solved the plots with magic, but this comes really close just because of how off-kilter everything else with the episode feels. The bottom of the barrel was easily the second Cliptastic countdown. The first one's worth outside of being a clip show is dubious, but this one felt far cheaper, with low-quality animation and phoned-in guest stars. It shouldn't really count by some metrics, so She's the Mayor can still fill in as my least favorite, if only for how odd it felt rather than being a terrible experience. Like a lot of shows with multiple plots, you can generally count on one of the plots to be entertaining if the other one isn't doing it for you, which tended to boost other less remarkable A-plots for me, such as The Magnificent Few or Candace Gets Busted. You're getting two fun cartoon plots for the price of one, and they're almost always good in their own ways. So, with all of that now covered, all the history, the characters, the most memorable seasons and episodes, I've come to a conclusion. Phineas and Ferb is my favorite show of all time. Asterix. It depends on what I mean. The Simpsons, SpongeBob, and Futurama are a mostly unbeatable trifecta for me if I'm referring to the best they've got to offer and their cultural impact, but they each had an unmistakable decline in quality. Phineas and Ferb rivals them at their greatest, but also didn't have as large of a fall from grace. At most, season 4 was kinda gimmicky, but it still had excellent episodes that continued to develop and take the show to new places. As one complete package, from beginning to end, it's a masterpiece. One of the funniest TV shows ever, one of the cleverest, most likable, most creative and colourful, and although it was made at the right place at the right time, as Disney television animation needed a breath of fresh air, it's still timeless. 5 years after it ended, Phineas and Ferb found itself a boost in popularity online, with a lot of the people who grew up on it making memes and essays in its honour, and if they were old enough, introducing it to their kids. How much of this has to do with the rise of Disney Plus and the nostalgia cycle hitting the 2000s is hard to say, but I can still see it being an acclaimed and celebrated piece of TV animation in another 50 years. It's proven to be a multi-generational success now, and its future looks very bright. Sure, Candace Against the Universe wasn't the big Phineas and Ferb movie it was originally hyped up to be, but hey, third time's the charm. Dan and Swampy are still confident that a proper theatrical adaptation is possible, and I don't care how long it takes, I just know it's going to be a hit. Phineas and Ferb might have premiered 15 years ago, but the excitement and potential that original Rollercoaster Across Town promised is still being felt after all this time. I love this show, and wish all the best to its creative team. They're going to be legends before long. Yes I do. Goodbye for now.
Dan Versus. Only at the Hub. Check local listings.
Where sweet and revenge come together.
Buddy, you're a boy, make a big noise playing in the